Hi, psychology class. It was really nice to see some of your faces on our Zoom call this morning. Um, if you weren't there, we missed you, and we really hope to see you at our next Zoom call on next Tuesday, May 19th at 10:45. In the meantime, this is a video that I promised you where I was going to go through chapter 3 and give you some information as you're flipping through the textbook, and hopefully this will help you to complete your assignment for this week, which is the scavenger hunt, both parts 1 and 2, which are due Sunday night by 11:59. All right, so we're transitioning to chapter 3. Just a reminder of what we did way back when we were in school. In Unit 1, we looked at the foundation of psychology, the approaches in the specialty fields of psychology, research, and the brain. So we're now moving on to Unit 2, and we're going to take a closer look at developmental psychology, specifically as it applies to infants and children, and we'll look at how the brain continues to develop as the child grows into adulthood. So we're going to be in Unit 2, Developmental Psychology, for the next 2 weeks. So this week and next week will both be in this Chapter 3. All right, so here is a quick just kind of snapshot of your life is kind of what we're going to look at. We're going to think back to some earlier events in your own life that you probably don't remember very well, and you may not even remember at all. So we're going to do the 3-1 daily focus, which is right here on the next slide. So for doing this, this is like we would do it in class. This would be like our warm-up, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to take a few minutes and take a look at the chart here and see if you can't answer those 4 questions. So I'm going to ask you to pause your video, answer those 4 questions, and then unpause it, and then I'm going to go over the answers with you in just a second. I'm going to go over the answers. If you still need more time, go ahead and pause. For number 1, what senses do you think an infant is able to use at birth? This one would have been hard to get maybe from the chart, but if you look through the book at all, the answers are seeing, hearing, smelling, and responding to their environment. So babies are born equipped with a lot of really great reflexes and senses to help them survive in the world. Number 2, so walking is generally viewed as a great milestone in a child's life. What developmental skills lead to the ability to walk? So if you look at your chart here, hopefully you started with at 3 months lifting their head. You need to be able to lift your head before you can walk. Depth perception, believe it or not, is really important. Depth perception helps us with our balance, and so that is something that we need in order to be able to walk. You've experienced this before. If you've ever been dizzy and you've tried to walk in a straight line, you can walk, but maybe not well, and that's because your depth perception and your environment around you is off. So they need to at least have that skill as well, so 6 months. Crawling. Most of us have to crawl before we walk. There may be a few exceptions to this, but most of us have to strengthen those muscles in our legs in order to be able to propel ourselves forward. And then lastly, at around 12 to 13 months, we should be able to walk if we've done all of these other steps. So being able to hold our head, our depth perception, and then developing those necessary muscles. If we haven't done those things, then a baby can't walk, okay? At what age is depth perception fully developed? We just talked about that, so hopefully you got that off the chart right there at 6 months. And then when does a child begin to use telegraphic speech? So right here, around 2 years is when they start to use that. Okay. So again, babies are equipped with a lot, all those different senses we talked about, seeing, hearing, smelling, in order to be able to experience the world around them. And then as they continue to grow, they'll start to develop more of that perception and more language. So our objectives here are to describe physical and perceptual development of newborns and then discuss the development of language. So the physical, perceptual, and language development, it's specialized. It's a specialized study of how individuals develop, not only just physically, but also socially, emotionally, morally, intellectually. And each one of these occurs in a cycle occurs in stages throughout the life cycle, but each one of them is interrelated within each one of those stages. So within the baby stage, all of this is happening. They're developing physical, social, emotional, moral, intellectual needs here. Once they have established those for this stage in life, then they start moving on to the next stage in life and they develop all of those again, so on and so forth. Okay, so each one, there's a lot going on in each stage as we continue to grow, and then we get to the next life cycle stage. There's also more learning to grow. So you can see, this is a teenager right here. You guys are still growing, developmentally speaking. Some of you may physically still be growing, but socially you're still growing, emotionally, morally, and intellectually. All right, so there's a lot still happening here. And even look at this, into adulthood. There's still more learning that occurs and development. All right, these are the key terms. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over these with you. You guys are going to have to go through those in your textbook because you're going to have to define some of those in your scavenger hunt. So just use the definitions in your book. So developmental psychologists, we said that they study the physical, social, emotional, moral, and intellectual stages of development for humans. So if you break that down even farther, some of the other things they look at continuity versus stage of development. So is development a continuous process or does it happen in stages? So I kind of already answered that for you. The answer is yes to both. We do develop in stages, but we're also continuously develop. So once we master one thing, we tend to move on to the next. So it's always continuous. And then stability versus change. This is permanence of our initial personality traits. Are we capable of changing those, or are we going to stick to what we were born with? So we'll look at that. And then nature versus nurture. This is the big, big question. We're going to spend all of next week really examining this and looking at a very specific case study of Jeannie. And we will really examine the effects of nature versus nurture. So basically, our heredity versus our environment on our development. And there's definitely psychologists argue both sides of this, but we'll look at that more next week. All right. These are just some funny little cartoon videos for you to kind of look at where some people believe nature versus nurture is. But some psychologists believe that most behaviors are a result of heredity, and others believe that most are a result of experience and of learning. What do you think? What are your thoughts? I tend to believe that there's probably a good bit of both there. I don't think it's one or the other. All right, so let's look at newborns and how they develop. All right, so development really begins long before birth. If you take any medical class, like I know if you take athletic healthcare, you'll go over a reproductive chapter, you'll see what happens. Even if you decide to take a nutrition course, which I teach for seniors, we do talk about the development of newborns. Within the first 6 weeks, in utero, a baby will develop all of their different body systems, skeletal, muscular, nervous, all of that. So there's a lot happening before the baby's even born. And there's a lot of inherited automatic traits that they have, that they're born with. We call these reflexes. And these are there to help a baby to be able to stay alive in their environment. You have the grasping reflex, where they can cling in response to the touch of the palm of their hand. If you've ever put your finger inside of even a 1-day-old baby, they'll reflexively just reach around and grab it. All right, and so that's a reflex that they have to help them be able to hold on to things like that they may need. Okay, a rooting reflex. So I realize this is cut off of your screen here at the bottom, but I'll read it to you. It says, an infant's response in turning toward the source of touching that occurs anywhere around their mouth. So if you've ever been around a baby and you just gently graze their cheek to the side, the baby will turn their head towards you and then open their mouth. This is what we call rooting. In reality, the baby is looking for food. That's naturally what they're expected. If they're breastfeeding, they're looking for the breast, and bottle feeding, they're turning and looking for the bottle. It's a natural reflex that they have in order to get them fed. All right. You guys are also going to look at some more reflexes. So on page 62 in your textbook, there's a little box that says more about. And what you guys are going to do is you're going to take a second and you're going to write down what these other reflexes are on your note sheet. So again, go ahead and pause the video, write them down, and we'll come back. All right, so the Moro reflex, you should have written down that it occurs when an infant is startled by a loud noise out of sight above its head. What happens is their arms spread out and they grasp upwards while their legs spread out, and it looks just like this image right here. So when they get startled, they kind of panic and spread everything out, almost like, hey, somebody pick me up, I need help, okay? The other one is the Babinski reflex. This one's really cool. It's one of my favorites. So if you're ever around a newborn baby and you run the sharp end of your fingernail along the bottom of their foot, their toes will reflexively flare outwards as you run your thumbnail up. The reason I think this is so cool is if you do this to yourself, you can try this while you're sitting right at home, run your fingernail up the bottom insole instep of your foot and watch what your toes do. They will naturally reflexively curl inwards into like a ball. Babies do the opposite. They curve outwards until they reach a certain age, and then eventually they start to curl inwards. So that's just a unique reflex that babies have. It's one way that doctors check to make sure that their neurological reflexes are functioning properly. This is what it looks like. All right, so they're using something sharp like a needle there, but you can just use your fingernails. You don't need to use anything sharp. Don't hurt yourselves. So why are we studying newborns? If we can't speak or understand the questions of curious psychologists, why even look at them? Well, to take advantage of what they can do. Babies can do so much. They can turn their heads, they can suck, they can look at things, they can cry, they can smile, show signs of fright or surprise. These are all tied to stimulation. And so by measuring their behaviors, we can actually determine how the infant perceives the world. So if they do that Moro reflex where they get startled, we know they can hear things. If they do the Babinski reflex, we know their nervous system is functioning properly. If they can do the rooting reflex with their mouth, we know that their digestive system is functioning properly and they know when they're hungry and that they want to eat. All right, so all of these things help us to know what they can do by determining what reflexes are present. All right, so I'm going to have to pause right here because unfortunately the program I'm using only allows me 15-minute videos. So if you've made it this far, great job. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video and then I'll post another one and get through the rest of Chapter 3, Section 1 with you. So apologize that I have to do it in segments, but unfortunately that's the way it is. So I'll be right back with my next video, okay?